I wasn't supposed to share a room with him. That's the first thing you need to understand. When I applied for that internship, I had this whole picture in my head: new city, new people, maybe a tiny bit of freedom for once. What I didn't picture was standing in a cramped hotel lobby at midnight, exhausted, holding my suitcase, while the receptionist casually told me there had been a booking issue, and that I'd be sharing a room. With who? I asked, already annoyed. She glanced at her screen. Troy. I remember that name hitting a little differently, because I knew Troy, not well, but enough. We'd met during the selection process, same group interviews, same awkward icebreakers, same long wait in that overly air-conditioned conference room. He was the guy everyone noticed without trying. Not loud, not obnoxious, just confident in a way that made people naturally gravitate toward him. Tall, broad shoulders, that effortless kind of posture, like he always knew exactly where he belonged. Dark hair that never seemed messy, even when it should have been. And this calm, steady voice that made everything he said sound grounded. We talked a couple times. Nothing deep, just small stuff. Still, I remembered him. And now I was supposed to live in the same room with him. For how long? I asked. The duration of the internship, she said, like it was nothing. 3 weeks. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. You're serious? She gave me that polite customer service smile. I'm afraid so. I ran a hand through my hair, already feeling the headache coming on. Traveling all day, barely sleeping, and now this. Is there literally no other option? No available rooms in the hotel, she said. But the room is quite spacious. Yeah. That didn't help. I exhaled slowly, trying not to overreact. It's just a room, I told myself. Just 3 weeks. You'll survive. Fine, I said finally. She handed me the keycard. Room 314. Of course it was. I dragged my suitcase to the elevator, my mind running in circles the entire time. It wasn't even about sharing space. I'd had roommates before. That wasn't the problem. The problem was him. Because even back during the interviews, I'd caught myself noticing things I shouldn't. The way he leaned back in his chair, relaxed while everyone else was tense. The way he listened when people spoke like he actually cared. The way his eyes flicked toward me once or twice, just enough to make me look away too quickly. It had been easy to ignore back then. This, not so much. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, snapping me out of it. Room 314. I stood in front of the door for a second longer than necessary, adjusting my grip on the suitcase handle. Just open it, I muttered to myself. So I did. And there he was. Troy was already inside, sitting on one of the beds, scrolling through his phone. He looked up the second I walked in. For a split second, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled. Dylan, right? His voice was exactly how I remembered, low, calm, way too easy. Yeah, I said, setting my suitcase down a little harder than I meant to. Looks like we got screwed. He let out a quiet laugh. Yeah, I was just told the same thing. There was no irritation in his voice. If anything, he sounded amused. Of course he did. You okay with it? He asked. I shrugged, trying to play it off. Not like we have a choice. Fair. There was a brief silence, not awkward exactly, but charged, like both of us were figuring out the same thing at the same time. 2 beds, 1 room, 3 weeks. I glanced around. The receptionist wasn't lying, the room was decent. 2 beds on opposite sides, a desk by the window, a small couch in the corner. Enough space to not feel completely suffocated. Still, which one did you take? I asked. Troy nodded toward the bed closer to the window. That one. You good with the other? Yeah. I moved over, dropping my bag onto the empty bed. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Like this could just be a regular roommate situation. Until I became hyper-aware of him again. The way he stood up, stretching slightly, the fabric of his t-shirt shifting just enough to show the outline of his torso. The way he glanced at me, not staring, but not entirely casual either. I turned away quickly, pretending to check my phone. Long trip? He asked. Yeah, I said. Yours? Same. Flight got delayed. Of course it did. He chuckled softly. That sound again. God, we talked for a bit after that. Nothing important. Just surface level stuff where we were from, what we studied, how insane the application process had been. It was easy. Too easy. That was the problem. Because the more we talked, the more I relaxed, and the more I forgot to keep my distance. At some point, I sat down on the edge of the bed, and he leaned against the desk across from me. Close enough that I could actually notice details I hadn't before, like the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, or the way his eyes held mine just a second longer than necessary when I spoke. It wasn't obvious, but it wasn't nothing either, and I started to feel it, that subtle tension creeping in. The kind that doesn't make sense yet, but you know it's there. Eventually, he glanced at the clock. Guess we should get some sleep, he said. First day tomorrow. Yeah, I replied, a little too quickly. We both moved around the room, getting ready in that awkward, shared space way, brushing teeth at different times, avoiding bumping into each other, pretending this was completely normal. Should have been. It wasn't. When the lights finally went off, the room fell into that quiet that feels louder than any noise. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling. I could hear him shifting slightly in the other bed. The faint rustle of sheets. His breathing steady and slow. Way too close. I turned onto my side, facing the wall. 3 weeks, I told myself. Just 3 weeks. But something about the way everything felt already off-charged different. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be simple. And that was before anything had even happened. I woke up before my alarm. Not because I was well rested. More like the opposite, my sleep had been light, restless, like my brain refused to fully shut off. For a second, I didn't even remember where I was. Then I shifted slightly and heard it. Troy breathing. Slow. Even. Close. Too close. My eyes opened immediately. Right. The room. The internship. Him. I stayed still, staring at the ceiling again, trying to ignore how aware I suddenly felt. It wasn't like we were sharing a bed or anything, we weren't even that close, but the fact that he was just there, a few feet away, did something to my brain I couldn't quite explain. I turned my head slightly. Bad idea. He was still asleep. On his back, one arm resting above his head. The blanket pushed down just enough to reveal the outline of his chest through his t-shirt. His hair was slightly messier than last night, and for once, he didn't look composed or controlled. He looked relaxed, unaware, and for some reason that made it worse. I looked away immediately, exhaling quietly. Get it together, I muttered under my breath. It was just a guy, just a roommate, just 3 weeks. I'd handled worse, right? A few minutes later, my alarm finally went off, breaking the silence. Troy stirred almost instantly. Shit, he mumbled, voice rough with sleep as he reached for his phone. That voice first thing in the morning? Yeah, I didn't need that. You always wake up that early? He asked, blinking a few times as he sat up. Usually, I said, already swinging my legs off the bed. Didn't mean to wake you. It's fine. I could feel his eyes on me for a second, like he was still half processing everything. Then he ran a hand through his hair and stood up. And that's when things got unnecessarily complicated. Because we both realized the same thing at the same time. One bathroom, one small space, morning routine, together. I started. He huffed out a quiet laugh. Yeah, this might take some coordination. Go ahead, I said quickly. I'll wait. You sure? Yeah. I wasn't being polite. I just needed a minute. He nodded and grabbed his stuff, heading into the bathroom. The door clicked shut. I exhaled again, running both hands over my face. Why did everything feel so intense already? We hadn't even done anything. But there was this underlying tension, like something just beneath the surface waiting to snap. And I didn't like how aware I was of it. A few minutes later, the shower turned on. I really tried to ignore it. But when you're in a quiet room, and the only other sound is water hitting tile, your brain starts filling in details you don't need. Like imagining him standing there, under the water. Yeah. No, I grabbed my phone, forcing myself to scroll through random stuff just to distract my thoughts. Didn't work. When he finally came out, dressed in a fresh shirt and jeans, hair still slightly damp, I looked up and immediately regretted it. He looked good, effortlessly. "Your turn," he said, tossing his towel onto his bed. "Thanks." I got up a little too fast, brushing past him on my way to the bathroom. And for a split second, just a second, our shoulders touched. It wasn't even intentional, barely anything, but it sent this quick, sharp awareness through me that made my chest tighten. I shut the bathroom door behind me a bit harder than necessary. "Seriously," I muttered to myself, gripping the edge of the sink. This was ridiculous. It was just physical proximity. That's all. I turned on the cold water, splashing some on my face, trying to reset. Didn't help much, because the second I stepped into the shower, I realized something else. His shampoo, his soap, the scent lingered. Clean, subtle, way too noticeable. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Staring at the wall like that would somehow fix it. Focus, I told myself. So I did. Or at least I tried to. By the time we left the room, things felt slightly more normal. We walked down together, grabbed coffee from the hotel lobby, and headed toward the building where the internship orientation was being held. The city was already busy, cars, people, noise, but somehow, I was still more aware of him walking next to me than anything else around us. "You nervous?" he asked. "A little," I admitted. "You?" "Not really. Of course not." He smirked slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You just don't seem like the type to get nervous. Everyone gets nervous. Not you." He glanced at me, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "You've known me for what, 2 days?" "Still." He huffed out a laugh, shaking his head. And again, too easy. Talking to him felt natural, comfortable, like we'd known each other longer than we actually had, which should have been a good thing. But instead, it just made everything more complicated. Because that tension, it didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. Especially when we reached the building and had to blend into the group of other interns, people talking, laughing, introducing themselves. Normal stuff, except every now and then I'd catch it. That glance. From him. Quick, subtle, but there. Like he was checking if I was still there. And every time, I'd feel it again, that same tight, confusing pull in my chest. By the time orientation started, I already knew one thing for sure. Sharing a room with Troy? Yeah. That was gonna mess with my head way more than I expected. And we were only on day 1. By lunchtime, I was already tired. Not from the work, we hadn't even started anything serious yet. It was just orientation, presentations, people talking at us for hours. No, I was tired from thinking, from being aware, from sitting in a room full of people and somehow still noticing only one. Troy. It was subtle at first. We ended up sitting next to each other, not planned. Just happened. There were empty seats, but he dropped into the one beside me like it was the most natural choice in the world. "Hope you don't mind," he said quietly. "Yeah, sure," I replied, trying to sound normal. But from that moment on, everything felt just slightly off. Not bad, just charged. At some point during one of the presentations, I felt it. His arm brushing mine. It wasn't even a real touch, more like a light graze when he shifted in his seat. But neither of us moved away immediately. That was the problem. It lingered, just enough to notice. I kept my eyes forward, pretending to pay attention to whatever the speaker was saying, but my brain had already checked out, because I could feel him. Warm, close, present, and I hated how aware I was of it. A few seconds later, he shifted again, pulling his arm back slightly. "Sorry," he murmured. "It's fine. Too quick. Too automatic." We both went quiet after that. Lunch break was worse. We ended up grabbing food with a small group of interns, sitting around one of those long tables that forces everyone into each other's space. Troy sat across from me this time, which should have been better. It wasn't, because now I could see him clearly. The way he leaned forward slightly when he listened. The way his fingers tapped lightly against his cup when he was thinking. The way his eyes kept flicking up toward me like he didn't even realize he was doing it. Or maybe he did. At one point, someone asked a question about housing. Wait, so are you guys all in separate rooms? A girl across the table asked. Couple people nodded. Then someone else said, Nah, I got paired with someone. Apparently they overbooked. I felt it before it even happened. That moment, that attention. So did you? Troy said casually, glancing at me. Of course he said it. I looked up. Yeah. Who are you with? Someone asked. I hesitated for half a second. Troy. A few heads turned between us. Oh, nice, someone said. At least you know each other. Yeah, Troy added, like it was no big deal. Could be worse. There was that slight smirk again. I narrowed my eyes at him. Wow, thanks. He chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. And for a moment it felt normal again. Just two guys joking around. Except, it didn't fully feel like that. Not to me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. More talking. More introductions. More information than I could realistically process. But through all of it, that awareness never really went away. If anything, it got sharper. Because now it wasn't just about proximity. It was about familiarity. The way we'd already fallen into a rhythm without even trying. Walking together between rooms. Sitting next to each other without discussing it. Sharing small comments under our breath during boring parts. Like we were already comfortable. And that scared me more than anything. By the time we got back to the hotel, I just wanted to shut my brain off. Long day, Troy said, dropping his bag onto the chair. Yeah, I replied, kicking off my shoes. There was a brief silence. Then he stretched slightly, rolling his shoulders. You want to grab dinner or just order something? I hesitated. Spending more time together didn't sound like a great idea, but saying no felt weird. I'm good with either, I said. He nodded. There's a place like 5 minutes away. Looked decent. Sure. Of course I said yes. Dinner didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. Because now it was just the two of us. No distractions. No other people. No noise to hide behind. Just conversation. And eye contact. Way too much eye contact. At one point, he asked, So why'd you apply for this internship? Experience, I said. And, I don't know. Change of pace. He nodded slowly. Yeah, same. Really? Yeah. There was a pause. Then he added, quieter this time. Also wanted to get out of my usual environment for a bit. Something about the way he said it made me look at him differently. Like there was more behind it. You didn't like it? I asked. It's not that, he said, glancing down at the table for a second before looking back up at me. Just felt stuck, I guess. I nodded. I got that. More than I expected. And just like that, the conversation shifted. It wasn't surface level anymore. Felt real. And that only made everything more intense. By the time we got back to the room, it was quiet again. Familiar, but heavier. I dropped onto my bed, staring at the ceiling. Troy moved around the room for a bit, grabbing his clothes. I'm gonna shower, he said. Yeah, I replied. The door closed, and just like that, I was alone again. Except not really, because I could still feel it. That tension, that pull, that something that didn't make sense yet. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I wanted it to go away. When he came back out hair damp again, t-shirt slightly clinging from the humidity, I forced myself not to stare. Didn't work. Your turn, he said. Yeah. I grabbed my stuff, brushing past him again. That same brief contact. That same reaction. Stronger this time. I paused for half a second after closing the bathroom door, gripping the handle. Something was building. I could feel it. And it wasn't just in my head anymore. That night, lying in bed again, the silence felt different. He shifted slightly. I did too. Neither of us said anything. But I knew he wasn't fully asleep either. And for the first time, I caught myself wondering something I hadn't let myself think before. Was I the only one feeling this? Or was he noticing it too? I don't know exactly when it stopped being just a thought. But I remember the moment it started feeling real. It was the third night. We'd fallen into a routine way too quickly. Wake up, get ready around each other, walk to the internship together, sit together, eat together, come back together. Like it was normal. Like we'd always been doing this. That night, we didn't go out. Both of us were too drained, so we just grabbed something quick and brought it back to the room. He sat on the couch. I took the bed. At first, it was just background noise, some random show playing on TV while we half paid attention, scrolling through our phones. But then, slowly, that silence started creeping back in. Not awkward, just thick. "You always this quiet?" he asked suddenly. I glanced up. "Depends. On what? Who I'm around." He smirked slightly at that. "So I'm making you quiet? Maybe you're just not that interesting." He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Damn. Didn't know you had that in you. It comes out when I'm tired." Sure. There it was again. That easy back and forth. But underneath it, something else. I shifted slightly on the bed, leaning back against the wall. He was still on the couch, but his body was angled toward me now, one arm resting along the back. Watching. Not obviously, but enough. At some point, I stopped looking at my phone. Didn't even realize when it happened. I just looked up, and he was already looking at me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then, "You keep doing that," I said. "Doing what?" "Looking at me like that." He didn't answer right away. Didn't look away either. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, like he was actually considering the question. "Like what?" he asked, quieter this time. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how close everything felt even with the space between us. "Like you're trying to figure something out." A pause. Then he exhaled lightly, almost like a small laugh. "Maybe I am." That wasn't the answer I expected. My chest tightened slightly. "And?" I asked before I could stop myself. "And what? Figure it out yet?" Another pause. Longer this time. His gaze dropped for just a second to my lips, then back up to my eyes. "Yeah." I noticed that. "No way I didn't." "Not yet," he said. Something in the way he said it made the air feel heavier. Like the room had gotten smaller. Like we weren't sitting on opposite sides anymore. I shifted again, but this time it wasn't to get comfortable. It was because I suddenly didn't know what to do with myself. "Maybe there's nothing to figure out," I muttered. "Maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. And neither was I. The TV kept playing. Neither of us watched it. At some point, he leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. Closer now. Not by much, but enough. "You ever feel like—" he started, then stopped. "Like what?" He hesitated, then shook his head once. "Nothing." I frowned slightly. "You started it." He looked back at me. There was something different in his expression now. Less casual. More focused. "Like things change fast," he said finally, "without you really noticing when it started." My stomach tightened, because I knew exactly what he meant. "Yeah," I said quietly. We held eye contact again. Longer this time. Too long. And then, he stood up, just like that, breaking it. "I should probably sleep," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," I replied, even though I wasn't tired anymore. Not even close. He grabbed his stuff and headed to the bathroom. The door closed, and I just sat there, staring at nothing, heart beating faster than it should have. That conversation, that look, that moment where neither of us looked away. Something had shifted, and there was no pretending it hadn't. When he came back out, things were quieter, more controlled, like we both knew what had just happened, and were choosing not to talk about it. He got into bed. I turned off the TV. Lights off. Dark again. But not the same as before. This time the silence felt aware. I lay there, staring into the darkness, trying to slow my thoughts down. Didn't work, because all I could think about was that moment. The way he looked at me, the way his voice dropped, the way he didn't deny anything. And then, "Dylan," his voice cut through the dark. Low, clear. My chest tightened. "Yeah." A pause, like he was deciding whether to say it. then you feel it too, right? Everything in me went still. I didn't even need to ask what he meant. I knew, and that was the problem. Because answering that question, that would change everything. I swallowed slowly, staring into the dark ceiling. Yeah, I said, quiet, but honest. Another pause. Longer. He exhaled, and I could almost hear the shift in him. Okay, he said, just that. But it wasn't nothing. It was acknowledgement, confirmation, something real. After that, neither of us spoke again. But sleep? Yeah. That didn't happen for a long time. Because now it wasn't just tension. It wasn't just thoughts. It wasn't just me wondering. Now I knew. He felt it too. And that made everything way more complicated. The next morning felt different. Not in an obvious way. Nothing had actually happened. But everything had. I woke up before my alarm again. Except this time it wasn't restless confusion, it was awareness. Immediate. Sharp. Because now I knew. And so did he. I didn't even have to look to feel it. That quiet presence across the room, it wasn't neutral anymore. It meant something. I exhaled slowly, dragging a hand over my face before finally turning my head. He was already awake, lying on his side this time, facing me, eyes open, watching, no pretending, no looking away, just there. Morning, he said. His voice was still low from sleep, but there was something else in it now, something more deliberate. Morning, I replied. Neither of us moved right away. We just stayed like that for a few seconds longer than normal. And yeah, there was no going back after that. Getting ready was tense. Not awkward. Not uncomfortable. Just charged in a way that made everything feel heavier than it should have been. He went to the bathroom first again. But this time, when the door closed, I didn't try to distract myself. I just sat there, thinking about what he said last night. You feel it too, right? And the fact that I said yes. No hesitation. No denial. Just yes. When he came out, he didn't avoid me. Didn't act like nothing happened. If anything, he held my gaze a little longer than usual. Your turn, he said. Same words as yesterday. Completely different meaning. I nodded and walked past him. And again our shoulders brushed. But this time, neither of us pretended it didn't happen. I felt it. He felt it. And for a split second, I almost turned back. Almost said something. I didn't. I went into the bathroom and shut the door. But my pulse was already too fast. The whole day felt like that. Like everything was slightly off balance. We still sat next to each other. Still talked. Still moved through everything together. But now there was something unspoken running underneath every interaction. Every glance lasted longer. Every accidental touch felt intentional. Every pause meant something. At one point during a break, we were standing off to the side while everyone else was talking. Not saying anything. Just there. And then, "You're thinking too much," he said. I looked at him. "You don't know that." "I do." "Yeah." He nodded slightly. "You get this look." "What look?" "Like you're trying to talk yourself out of something." That hit a little too close. I looked away for a second, exhaling. Maybe I am. A pause. Then, don't. I looked back at him. His expression wasn't joking anymore. Wasn't casual. It was steady. Certain. "Don't what?" I asked quietly. "Don't overthink it." Easy for him to say. But the way he said it, it made my chest tighten again. That night was worse. Or better. I don't know. We got back to the room earlier than usual. Neither of us suggested going out. Neither of us needed to. We were already there. He sat on the couch again. I didn't take the bed this time. I sat on the edge of it, closer than before. The space between us was smaller. Not by accident. And we both knew it. The TV was on again. Same as yesterday. Same background noise. Same excuse. But this time it didn't even last long. Because after maybe 10 minutes, "You're doing it again," I said. "Doing what?" "Looking." He didn't deny it. Didn't even pretend. "Yeah," he said. Just like that. My heart picked up. "And?" I asked, even though I already knew this wasn't a game anymore. He leaned back slightly, eyes still on me. And I'm not really trying to hide it. There it was. Out in the open. No filter. No buffer. I swallowed. Why? He held my gaze. Because I don't think you want me to. That, yeah, that hit harder than anything else so far. Because he wasn't guessing. He knew. And the worst part? He was right. I didn't. I should have. But I didn't. The silence stretched again. But this time it wasn't uncertain. It was building. Slow. Heavy. Unavoidable. He leaned forward slightly. Closer now. Tell me to stop, he said. My chest tightened. Why? Because I will. I knew he meant it. That's what made it worse. Because that meant this. This was on me. I had a way out. Right there. Easy. All I had to do was say it. Stop. That's it. One word. But I didn't say it. Couldn't. Because everything in me was already leaning the other way. Toward him. Toward whatever this was. The silence answered for me. And he noticed. Of course he did. His gaze dropped again. Not fully. Just enough. Then back up. Slow. Measured. Yeah, he said quietly. And that one word? That felt like a line being crossed. He didn't move immediately. Neither did I. But the distance between us? It didn't feel like distance anymore. Felt like something waiting to disappear. And I knew. Whatever happened next. There was no going back to just roommates. I don't remember who moved first. I've replayed that moment more times than I can count. And every time it feels slightly different. Like my brain keeps trying to soften it, slow it down, make it easier to explain. But the truth is, it wasn't slow. It wasn't careful. It was inevitable. 1 second we were just sitting there, that space between us thick with everything we hadn't said. The next, gone. I don't even think we stood up fully. It was more like we both leaned forward at the same time, closing that distance without needing to think about it. And then, we were right there, close enough that I could feel his breath. Close enough that if either of us moved even a little more. Dylan. My name came out low. Not a question. Not a warning. Just real. I swallowed, my heart pounding way too fast. Yeah. But I didn't pull back. Neither did he. His eyes dropped again. That same way as before. Only this time he didn't look away. And I didn't either. Last chance, he said quietly. My chest tightened. He meant it. I knew he did. If I said stop now, he would. Everything would reset. We'd go back to 2 guys sharing a room, pretending none of this ever happened. It would be easier, cleaner, safer. But standing there, this close to him, feeling everything I'd been trying to ignore for days finally right in front of me. I didn't want easy. I didn't want safe. So I shook my head. Just once. Small. But enough. And that was it. That was all it took. He closed the distance first. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just sure. And the second it happened, everything else disappeared. All the noise, all the overthinking, all the back and forth in my head. Gone. Because it wasn't confusing anymore. It wasn't hypothetical. It was real. And yeah, it hit harder than I expected. Not just physical. Something deeper. Like everything we'd been building without saying it finally snapped into place. I didn't even realize when my hand came up, gripping lightly at his shirt, pulling him closer. Or when his hand settled against my side, firm enough to keep me there. Like neither of us was letting the other step back now. Because there was no reason to. There was nothing to question anymore. When we finally pulled back, it wasn't far. Just enough to breathe. Just enough to look at each other. And that's when it hit me again. This wasn't a mistake. Not for him. Not for me. There was no hesitation in his expression. No second guessing. Just that same steady focus I'd noticed from the beginning. Only now, it was all directed at me. Yeah, he said quietly, like he was confirming something to himself. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. Yeah, I echoed, real smooth. He huffed out a soft laugh at that, and somehow that made it feel even more real. Less intense in a good way. Less like something that was about to explode. More like something that had already happened and wasn't going anywhere. We didn't rush into anything else. That's the part that surprised me the most. Because it would have been easy to. Everything was already there. But instead, we just stayed close. Like neither of us wanted to break whatever this was by moving too fast. I ended up sitting back on the edge of the bed. He didn't go back to the couch. He stayed right there, standing between my knees for a second before finally sitting down next to me. Close, not touching at first. Then, barely, our arms brushing. This time on purpose. "You okay?" he asked after a moment. I nodded, still catching my breath a little. "Yeah." "You sure?" "Yeah," I repeated, glancing at him. "You?" He leaned back slightly, looking at the ceiling for a second before answering. "Yeah." A pause. Then, "I didn't expect that to happen this fast." I let out a small laugh. "No." He glanced at me. "You did." "No," I admitted. "Not at all." Another pause. But this one felt lighter, easier, because now we weren't guessing anymore. After a few minutes, reality started creeping back in. The room, the situation, 3 weeks, sharing a space, together. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling. "This is gonna make things complicated," I said. "Yeah," he agreed. No denial, no pretending otherwise. "But," he added. I looked at him. "But what?" He met my eyes again, and there it was, that same look from before. Only now I understood it. Completely. "I don't think I care." That hit different, because I felt the same way, even if I didn't want to admit it yet. We stayed there for a while longer, talking, not about what just happened, not directly, but about everything around it. Like we were both adjusting to this new version of us, and figuring out what it meant without saying it out loud. At some point, the conversation faded. The room got quiet again, but this time, it wasn't tense. It wasn't uncertain. Felt settled. Later, when the lights were off and we were both in our own beds again, felt different. Completely. Not distant. Not awkward. Just different. I turned onto my side, staring into the dark. "Dylan," his voice again, closer than before, even though the distance hadn't changed. "Yeah." A short pause. Then, "We're not gonna pretend that didn't happen, right?" I let out a quiet breath. "No." "Good." Another pause. And then, "Because I don't want to." I closed my eyes for a second. "Yeah. Me neither." And just like that, everything changed. The next few days blurred together. Not because nothing happened, but because too much did. Just not in the way I expected. We didn't suddenly become reckless. We didn't act like we were in some secret relationship either. If anything, on the outside, nothing really changed. We still walked to the internship together, still sat next to each other, still talked, joked, blended in with everyone else like two normal guys sharing a room. But behind that, everything was different. It showed in small things first, like the way he'd brush past me in the room and let his hand linger just a second longer than necessary. Or the way I'd catch him watching me, not hiding it anymore, and instead of looking away, I'd just hold his gaze. There was no pretending now. No confusion, just this quiet, constant awareness that sat between us, and built, slowly, every single day. The 4th night after it happened, that's when it shifted again. We got back later than usual, some group dinner thing that dragged on way too long. Everyone was a little tired, a little quieter. When we finally got to the room, neither of us turned on the TV. Didn't need it anymore. I dropped my bag near the bed, exhaling. "I'm exhausted." "Yeah," Troy said, closing the door behind him. But he didn't move further into the room. I noticed that. He just stood there for a second, watching me, and I felt it immediately. That shift. The same one as before. Except this time, stronger, more certain. I straightened slightly, meeting his gaze. "What?" I asked. He shook his head once, stepping closer. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. We both knew that. He stopped a few feet away, closer than before. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that it didn't feel like distance anymore. You ever think about how weird this is? I said, mostly to break the tension. All the time. And you're just okay with it? He looked at me for a second. Then, yeah. No hesitation. That steady certainty again. It got to me. More than I wanted to admit. I let out a small breath, glancing down for a second before looking back up. Must be nice. What? Not overthinking everything. He huffed out a quiet laugh. I am thinking. Doesn't look like it. That's because I already decided. My chest tightened slightly. Decided what? He stepped closer. Now there was barely any space left. That I want this. There it was. Clear. Direct. No room to misinterpret. My pulse picked up again. And you're just gonna say that like it's nothing? I asked. It's not nothing, he said quietly. That's why I'm saying it. I didn't have a response for that. Didn't know what to do with it. Because part of me wanted to push back. Slow things down. Make sense of everything. But the other part, the stronger part, was already leaning toward him. Again. You're doing it, he said. What? Thinking too much. I let out a breath. I can't just. Yeah. He cut in softer this time. You can. His hand came up. Slow. Deliberate. And for a second I thought he was going to stop. Give me space. Give me a choice. But he didn't. His fingers brushed lightly against my arm. Barely anything. But enough. Stop trying to make it complicated, he said. My chest tightened again. Because I knew he was right. I was the one making it harder than it needed to be. Not him. Not this. Just me. I looked at him. Really looked this time. At the way he wasn't hesitating. At the way he wasn't pulling back. At the way he was giving me just enough space to choose. But not enough to run. And yeah, that did something to me. So I stopped thinking. For once, I just moved. Closed that last bit of distance. And this time, it wasn't hesitant. It wasn't unsure. Felt like a decision. After that, things didn't feel confusing anymore. They felt real. Solid. Like whatever this was, it wasn't just a moment anymore. It was something we were both actively choosing. Later, we ended up sitting on the bed again. Closer than before. No space this time. No pretending. No distance. You still think this is a bad idea? He asked. I leaned back slightly, exhaling. Yeah. He smirked a little. And I glanced at him. And I don't care either. That earned a quiet laugh. Good. We didn't talk about what happens next. Didn't label anything. Didn't try to define it. But we didn't need to. Because the way he looked at me, the way I felt when he did, that was already enough. That night, when we turned the lights off, I didn't feel that distance anymore. Even from across the room. It was gone. Replaced by something else. Something stronger. Something I wasn't ready to name yet. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about sharing a room anymore. It didn't hit me all at once. Not in some dramatic, movie-like realization. It was quieter than that. More gradual. The last week of the internship went by faster than everything before it. And that should have been a good thing. But it wasn't. Because now there was a deadline. Not for the work. For this. For whatever had been building between me and Troy since the first night. We never talked about what we were. Not once. But we didn't need to. It was in everything. The way we automatically found each other in a room full of people. The way conversations with others felt like background noise compared to the ones we had alone. The way the same room that felt too small at first started feeling like the only place things actually made sense. On the second to last night, we stayed in again. No group dinner. No distractions. Just us. Like always now. I was sitting on the bed, scrolling through my phone without really reading anything. He was by the window this time, leaning against the frame, looking out at the city lights. Quiet. Different kind of quiet. I noticed it immediately. You're doing that thing again, I said. He glanced back at me. What thing? Thinking. He huffed out a small laugh. Yeah. I sat up a little straighter. About. A pause. Then he turned fully, facing me. This ends in 2 days. There it was. said out loud. And yeah, that hit harder than I expected. I looked down for a second, nodding slightly. Yeah. Neither of us spoke after that. Because what was there to say? We both knew. Come here, he said after a moment. Simple, quiet, but not something I questioned. I stood up and crossed the room without thinking. Stopped right in front of him. Close, like always now. You regret it? He asked. No. Immediate. Honest. Do you? No. Another pause. But it would have been easier if I did, he added. I let out a breath. Yeah. Easier. Cleaner. Less complicated. But also, less real. And I didn't want that. Not anymore. I wasn't looking for this, I admitted. Me neither. But we found it anyway, he finished. I nodded. There was something frustrating about how simple he made it sound. And something comforting about it too. What happens after? I asked. There it was. The question we'd both been avoiding. He didn't answer right away. Didn't look away either. Just stayed there. Thinking. For once. Then, I don't know, he said. At least he was honest. That doesn't bother you? I asked. It does. I blinked slightly. It does. Yeah, he said, quieter now. Just not enough to make me pretend this isn't worth it. That stuck. Because that's exactly what I'd been struggling with. The logic of it. The timing. The fact that this made no sense. And still, none of that felt like enough to walk away. I leaned back slightly against the wall, exhaling. This is messed up. He smiled a little. Yeah. And we're just going with it? Yeah. I shook my head, letting out a quiet laugh. Okay. The last night was worse. Or better. Still not sure. We didn't say much. Didn't need to. Everything felt heavier. Like we were both trying not to think about the fact that this was the last time we'd be in this room together. The last time things would feel this simple. When the lights went off, I didn't stay in my bed. Not this time. I sat up after a few seconds, staring into the dark. Then, you awake? I asked. Yeah. A pause. Then, come here. Same words as before. But this time, they meant something else. I didn't hesitate. Didn't think. I just got up and crossed the room. And that was it. No more distance. No more pretending. No more time left to waste. We didn't talk about the morning. Didn't talk about leaving. Didn't talk about what happens next. Because in that moment, none of it mattered. The next day came too fast. Of course it did. Packing felt wrong. Like I was undoing something I wasn't ready to let go of. He was quieter than usual. So was I. We didn't avoid each other. But we didn't force conversation either. Everything felt understood. Without being said. At the door with our bags packed, ready to leave. That's when it finally hit. This was it. No more shared room. No more easy proximity. No more built-in excuse to be around each other. Just real life again. So, I said, gripping the handle of my suitcase a little tighter than necessary. So, he echoed. We both stood there for a second. Neither of us moving. Neither of us really knowing how to end this. Then, this doesn't have to be it, he said. I looked up. What? We don't live that far, he added. It's not like this disappears unless we let it. My chest tightened. Because that option. I hadn't let myself think about it. Are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to pretend this was just some temporary thing, he said. Unless that's what you want. It wasn't. Not even close. I exhaled slowly. Yeah, I said. I don't want that either. Something in his expression shifted. Softer. Relieved. Okay. And just like that, it didn't feel like an ending anymore. Not really. More like something unfinished. In a good way. We walked out together. Not because we had to, but because now it felt like the only option that made sense. I thought sharing a room with him would be the hardest part. Turns out, walking away from it was. But at least now, I knew I didn't have to.